training volume and how it applies to you. Over the course of this video, I want to explain some of the context and the nuance surrounding different volume recommendations and hopefully provide you with some clarity on how to make gains in what is appropriate for you. That's the aim, okay? Because I've trained for 26 years. I've coached for 11. I also competed for 18 years in 3 different strength sports. Now, over the course of that time, I've changed a lot. My body's changed. My training needs have changed. I've seen so many clients, train them in different areas of their life, different body types, different personalities. So I have a wide breadth of experience in this area, and it can come across as quite confusing if you don't have the knowledge to decipher all these different volume recommendations. So over the course of this video, hopefully my goal is to provide you with some clarity over all of that to make this topic seem a little bit less confusing for you. So I'm going to cover, first of all, your training advancement. So that is whether you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced, and how that affects your volume requirements. And of course, in doing so, I need to talk a bit about how we know if you're a beginner, an intermediate, or advanced. Secondly, I'm going to link volume to intensity or effort. And third is probably the most important one, which is individual factors. So stick around for that. And I'm going to explain a bit about how individual factors can trump almost everything. So anyway, let's get straight into the video. So first of all, training advancement. Now, from what I've seen in my training life, if we were to put your volume needs on a graph, it would sort of look like an inverted U. So it would start off very low as a beginner. It would rise to its highest as an intermediate, and then it would go down again as an advanced lifter. So that's just what I've seen. Now let's talk a bit about each stage. So beginner, fairly simple to know what a beginner is. You're a guy who's new to the gym. Now, the reason that the volume is so low at this stage is because of the novelty stimulus. It's very new. I mean, there are very few activities like lifting weights. Even if you were to do a more aggressive sport, it's not going to be the same as lifting weights. Lifting weights is going all out for anywhere between 5 to 20 repetitions. Now you compare that to, say, a game of football, like soccer. You have literally thousands of repetitions, kicking the ball, running, tackling, thousands of repetitions over the course of 90 minutes. You compare that to the extreme end, which is a marathon. You have millions of repetitions in what might be 3 or 4 hours, or however long it takes you to run your marathon. So lifting weights, in the grand scheme of what the human body can do, is at the very extreme end, the very high intensity end. So it's a very unusual stress for pretty much anything that you would have done. So the novelty effect as a beginner is extreme. You will get very quick, very rapid adaptations to lifting. Now, beginners can typically adapt to things very, very quickly. So a beginner could quite conceivably, and I've seen this happen, come in on a Monday, do a full body routine, and come back on Wednesday of the same week. Not only have they recovered, but they're also stronger and ready to go again. It's that quick for beginners. You get a series of not only neurological gains, but also just biological gains of increased muscle mass, storage of glycogen, rapid improvements. If you're going to get stretch marks at any time, it's probably going to be if you complete a successful beginner year. That was where I got the majority of my stretch marks initially, many, many years ago. So for beginners, you're looking at lower levels of volume because the novelty stimulus is so high. Now, all of this is laid out in my book, The Noob, which was updated recently. So you can look at practical outlines for what to do as a complete beginner and for your first anywhere between 6 months to a year of training. In terms of how long the beginner phase lasts for, it's very individual. If you do it successfully, you could be in and out of the beginner stage within 3 months. It's over that quickly with a consistent lifter who is motivated to train hard and improve and is not afraid of adding weight to the bar. It can be that rapid, and you can experience a dramatic change in your physique. Now, it can also take longer if you're inconsistent, but in general, that's what I've seen in my experience if they are held accountable and they are coached. After that stage is over, we then run into the intermediate stage, which is characterized by 2 things. First of all, you're still not lifting that much weight. Okay, like in the grand scheme of your entire training life, you're still at the intermediate stage where you're not lifting that much weight. And also, you're not going to be lifting as intensely as you eventually will be when you are hopefully an advanced lifter years later. So those two factors come together to mean that the level of actual volume you need to carry on growing is exponentially higher. You need more stimulus than you did as a beginner, but it gets quite high at this stage. Practically speaking, the intermediate stage where you will have the highest volume recommendations. This is where my 8 to 16 sets per body part per week comes into play. Because typically at the intermediate level, you will need more because you need a continued level of stimulus to carry on adapting. I mean, it's like any adaptation in the body. A callus is the common one, or a suntan. Let's say you go out for a tan. I went on holiday recently. I get a certain amount of tan from one day of tanning out in the sun. I get more as I'm out there progressively. Now, at a certain point, it's going to level off and I need to increase the exposure time. So I need to spend more time in the sun on that given day. So with training, it's no different. If you're looking at pushing further in the intermediate stage, you will have to mechanically do more because those two factors, you're still not lifting that much weight and you're also not training as hard as you eventually will. So you just literally have to do more work. That is where volume is a lever you can pull to ensure that you keep on progressing. But as I always say on this channel, only do as much as you need to get to the next level, to get to the next 5 pounds on the bar or the next 2.5 kilos. You don't need this arbitrarily huge amount of volume. The volume is only there to facilitate more weight on the bar, to cause that adaptation to get you to the next level. So intermediate stage is where, practically speaking, you'll need the most volume. Now, as you move into the advanced stage, essentially, you should hopefully know what works for you. But as an advanced lifter, you will need a continually more stimulus to cause further and greater adaptations. Now, a lot of the guys in the evidence-based community mistakenly believe that you just needed this infinite amount of volume and more at the advanced stage to get more and more gains. The first problem is, practically speaking, that is not what I see advanced guys do. Again, just to throw my qualifications at you, I've been a lifter for 26 years. I've competed at high level for 18 years. I've coached for 11. I know lifters, I know gyms, I know what people are actually doing on the ground. Now, you might disagree, but if you don't have that breadth of experience, have a bit of humility with your thought process. So the reason that your volume levels actually go down in practice is because at the advanced level, you are capable of working harder. If you get there, you are capable of working harder than you were at the intermediate stage. So you can get more out of the weight. You are also able to focus more on the task. So your form is generally better, it's more precise, because with those heavier loads, typically becomes more precise training. Otherwise, you're going to get hurt. So you have this situation where, yes, you need more stimulus, but you can get more out of less. And you need to, because if you continue to do high volumes with heavier weights, recovery is going to be a problem and you're not going to be able to do as much as you need to grow because you're just going to get hurt. So practically speaking, at the advanced level, from what I've seen, what advanced lifters are actually doing, like I know a lot of UK amateurs who are absolutely insanely big and dense. Volume goes down. It doesn't carry on going up in this infinite loop, which is what was suggested by the evidence-based crowd many years ago, and is still supported by some of them in their volume analysis. So as I say, from what I've seen, practically speaking, volume requirements go down at the advanced level. So you end up overall with this U-shaped bell curve. Beginner, volume requirements are low because of the novelty factor. At the intermediate stage, they are practically the highest because you're still not lifting with that much intensity and focus, or as much as you will do eventually. And also the weights are still not as heavy as they will be eventually. And then practically speaking, the volume goes down at the advanced stage because you can get more out of less volume, less sets, and you can train harder with heavier weights. And as a result, volume goes down practically. And again, theory is different from practice. What I hear people should do, which is infinite volumes as they get more advanced, is just very different from what I see advanced lifters actually do. The next factor is how hard you train. And this changes a lot of things. So first of all, let's talk about the obvious things, which is failure versus RAR, or the scale would be the scale of useful RAR would be beyond failure. Okay, so intensity techniques, to failure, to 0 RAR, to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So the harder you train, generally speaking, the less volume you're going to be able to recover from, and the less volume you need as well, because you're getting more out of the sets you are doing. So therefore you need less of those sets. Now, part of this will go into the individual factors, which I'll cover in the next section. But for some people, they might not be able to train as hard as possible. Now, my personal preference is train very, very hard and maximize your intensity first, reasonably, to train things to failure, as long as it's safe to do so. I don't generally advocate going beyond failure, but train to failure where it's safe to do so. If it's not safe to do so, train to zero RER, right? And then match your volume to that. I'm not as big a fan of doing it the other way around, like having an insane high amount of volume and then matching your intensity and just surviving the work, because that approach tends to degrade the quality of work, which can cause recovery problems, because you end up with doing all the same mechanical work, putting all the same joint stress, wear and tear on your body, but without the stimulus to show for it. It's not a good trade-off. So I generally prefer people going harder on less, because it's less stressful on the body. Doing a lot more with an RR approach tends to cause quite a lot of stress. And again, that's just not what people end up doing practically at the advanced level, because they realize what I'm saying is right. You will get less wear and tear by going harder on less. And again, I'm not saying be reckless. So let's be sensible about what I'm saying here. Let's not misquote me. But yeah, so hard training, how hard you train, generally will affect your overall level of volume. Now, the other factor is some guys just can't train that hard. Okay, now this is not a judgment call. It's not a morality thing. But if you coach people for long enough, like I have, you will come across people who just are not able to train that hard. They just can't do it. So for them, you are going to have to ramp up the volume, just the way it is. It's no judgment against them. It's no moral thing. It's just the fact that for whatever reason, for whatever range of psychobiological factors that go into their genetic makeup, they just are not able to push that hard. They might be very good endurance runners. They might be very good at that. Or on the other hand, they might just be very stressed out individuals. They might be very highly strung. It seems to be a commonality I find with guys who are not able to push very hard, and they tend to be quite highly strung. And so those conversations tend to be quite difficult because there's a lot of denial involved. Just what I've seen, a personality type may well account for a sort of hard gainer type where they don't push that hard. They need more volume. They struggle to recover. They're a bit highly strung. There's a type, But in any case, the overall summary of this section is the harder you train, the harder you can train, the less volume you'll need. So if you remember the bell-shaped curve, if you train very, very hard, that entire curve across your entire life will be on the lower end. If you don't train very hard, that entire curve will be on the higher end. It's just the way it works. You still have individual factors which are coming in the next section. You still have your advancement level, but how hard you train will affect where that U-shaped bell curve is for you as an individual. Right, I just need to add in one additional factor which affects the overall level of volume that you need, and that is frequency. So we've discussed the role of intensity, but frequency also has interaction with volume. Now, from what I've seen, and my thoughts on this more recently have become clearer, is that frequency is its own factor which affects volume. And I think it's actually the opposite of what the evidence-based crowd used to believe, or maybe still does currently believe. Because what used to be the belief was that frequency allows you to do more volume. You can do 6 sets on one day and then on the next, so you get more volume overall. But again, what I see people saying you should do, or what you can do with frequency, is the opposite of what happens in practice. In practice, what I've seen is people who train more often, like train a body part 3 times a week, for example, they need less to progress, because frequency is its own independent variable for growth. It's a factor which has been kind of dismissed in the past as volume's little brother. And it not really being important, it just essentially being an adjunct to volume. I don't think that's the case. It seems to be its own independent growth factor. And the higher your frequency, the less volume you need to grow, from what I've seen. Now, I've covered this in a video recently, and I think it's because of the diminishing returns from each set. This was from a study by Schoenfeld, Krieger, and Ogborn in 2017. They gave us rough guidelines on how effective each set is past the first one. So essentially, you need something like 5 additional sets to match the growth stimulus of the first one. Therefore, if that is true, it can't possibly be true that all volume is the same across the week. It doesn't matter how you split it. Because if you're getting more first touches within reason, that's always going to give you more growth proportionately for the same amount of sets. So that means, like I'm saying, you can get away with less. And there's a large drop off. After the first set, it drops to something like 40%, and then much, much lower after that. So I think there is value in doing up to 3 sets 3 times a week, from what I've seen, but you get a lot out of that first set. So the more you split it up, the more your frequency is within reason, the less volume you need total. Now, when it comes to the top end of this, I think 3 is about right. Practically speaking, I think 3 is about right. People have said, well, why not do 6? You can do 6. I've done it. I did it for years, literally for years. I did full body 5-6 days a week for about 5 years, between the years of 2007 to 2010. That was the birth of my wizard routine. That ebook that you see on my website, it's not just a book that I made up. I lived that for 5 years. None of my ebooks are. They all come from years of personal and coaching experience. That's why I don't have a lot of ebooks. I have the ones I have, and they are solid because they're based on real results. So yeah, you can do that, but I think that requires, I'm not sure you need to do that, basically. You can, but I'm not sure you need to. I'm not sure it's going to give you that much more benefit than just going 3 times a week for up to 3 sets each. But anyway, I'm just adding this in after I've recorded this video. Now let's get back to the rest of the video. Now, the final section is going to be individual factors. So individual factors, I can name some of them, but really some of them are also just psychological preferences, things that you respond best to, things that appeal to you. Like, I'll give you an example, Dorian. I don't think Dorian, based on what I know of Dorian and what I know of the older guys from the era who I grew up with, I don't think they would do very well with high volume routines, because I don't think they would do well with pulling back. Back in that day, lifting weights and being on stage in just your underwear and tan was already seen as a bit of a soft activity to do. I don't think they would have gone very well if they also pulled back in training and did relatively easy training. The atmosphere in the Midlands in the 90s was very different to like what I imagine LA was like in the 80s and 90s. It's just a very different vibe, and there's nothing good or bad with that. It's just the way it was. And there was a lot more poverty in this area back in the day. And I think a lot of those guys valued hard work, hard effort. And when they went to the gym, it was to do a job. It wasn't to have fun with their buddies. It was to do a job and work hard on doing that job and getting the results from that job. So the mentality suited Dorian. I don't think Dorian would have done as well with high volume routines. Never mind his physical traits, but I mean his mentality. I think individual factors are such that they can trump everything. And there'll be people in the comments. And by the way, at this point, I'll just say, please share your anecdotes in the comments. I'm more than happy to hear from you and what your experiences are. But individual factors is that sort of X factor, which can trump almost everything. On that note, by the way, I just want to shout out the sponsor of this video, which is my app, Fazlifts RX, your prescription for gain. So if you are still struggling with this, I'm doing my best to explain how this all plays out. But practically, the app can help you out because it will put you on a routine and it will adapt the routine to you as you progress or as you stall over the course of time. It will look at the specific places where you are stalling, where you are progressing. It will learn from that and adapt your routine to suit that. You can try that out, and I would run it for a while and let the app learn more about you. The longer you use the app, the more it will learn about you and individualize its approach to you. So it will actually get better the longer you use it. I fully endorse it. It is a fantastic piece of tech, and there are further improvements coming out to the app in Q1 and Q2 of next year. So watch out for those. It's well worth it. I would not attach my name to anything which I felt was an inferior product. It's very good. Give it a try. The link's in the description. Okay, so yeah, just carry on speaking about individual factors. Individuality trumps. Now, I'll say also one thing. I think the robustness of your physique, the thickness of your joints also comes into play when looking at volume. Now, from what I've seen, thicker jointed, more genetically gifted individuals, your classic rugged jock types, they tend to respond to everything, whatever. those are the guys that can take a low volume routine and respond very well to it. Conversely, they can also do very well with high volume routines. They can do whatever they want. Now, that's your prototypical thick, open IFBB pro physiques. Like nowadays, the way that the open bodybuilding is going in the IFBB, this is predominantly the type you get. You just don't get thinner jointed individuals. They're all thick and blocky and large because size is rewarded. You think of your Jay Cutlers, your Nick Walkers, your Hadi Chupans. These are all thick, compact individuals. Those are the kind of guys who can respond from a range of volumes. Low volume, high volume, whatever. Dorian is a classic example. I think there are other reasons why some of those guys don't train with lower volumes and higher weights. We don't need to talk about that right now, but you guys know what I'm talking about. There's a whole pharmaceutical side of things, which mean they may want to pick a safer method regardless of what they're suited to. In any case, from what I've seen of more genetically typical guys and guys who are maybe less genetically blessed, like your very thinly boned, more frail guys, even if they're overweight, they can still be frail, underneath everything. They will struggle. They don't tend to respond very well to very low volumes. They need a bit more, just so that they can reduce the intensity a little bit and do a bit more mechanical work, because they're not able to cope with those extremely heavy weights. They're not able to get there. So individual factors come into play. And again, this is an area where some of you will have your opinions as well. And feel free to voice those in the comments and help the rest of your audience out. Right. One more thing that I remembered after I finished recording, I'm adding this in, is nutritional status. You can see why this gets very convoluted as a topic. So your nutritional status will affect how much volume you can get away with. And your nutritional status will generally affect your goals, which will also affect how much volume you need. So if you are dieting, as we saw with the example of Jeff Nippard recently, and also of myself as well, you can get away with less because your goals are generally maintenance. Also, you will be able to handle less because you have less calories coming in, less recovery, and all of the things will be affected by that, like, for example, sleep, stress, all those things. So conversely, if you're bulking, you can get away with more, and odds are you will be looking at gaining muscle, so you may well be able to do more, to gain more, within reason. So you can see why volume recommendations can vary wildly in practice, even from the same person, because you can have an advanced lifter who is currently dieting. Their volume requirements will be pretty low. And let's say they train with relatively high frequency, their volume requirements might be even lower, like mine were recently. Now, you get that in comparison with an intermediate, a lifetime intermediate who is relatively young and isn't yet that strong, doesn't really train that hard. Their volume requirements may well be vastly different to the first example. These are all factors which affect your volume requirements. And I do hope this video has shed some light on, if nothing else, just how complicated it can get. But hopefully some of you have learned some things from this as well. All right, back to the video. The purpose of this video was to help you to clarify the volume recommendations you might see across the internet. Okay, there are a range. There is nuance. Generally speaking, you can classify the factors which affect your training volume in 3 areas. First one is your training advancement. Okay, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. Generally, from what I see, it's a U-shaped bell curve. Whereas at the beginning, when you're a beginner, due to the novelty effect, you need less volume. As you progress, you need more. And then when you're advanced, you need less because you are more efficient, you are stronger, you're more focused, and you work harder. The next factor is how hard you train. Generally speaking, the harder you train, the more that U-shaped bell curve will go over to this side for less volume. The less capable or the less willing you are to train very, very hard, the more the volume you'll do. And finally, there are individual factors which trump everything. Your enjoyment, your preference, your body makeup, all things which we just haven't studied yet at all. These are all a range of X factors which can affect everything. And they account for many of the individual differences we see in the YouTube comments every day. But again, hopefully this video will provide some affirmation to all of you, however you do things. You know, whether you're a low volume guy, high volume guy, whatever else. Personally, me, I am volume agnostic. I don't have the luxury of being a low volume guy or a high volume guy. My recommendations span across the field for different people because I'm an actual coach. I don't have the luxury of just saying, right, I'm a hitter from now on. It's not practical. I have to work with people and get them results. I can't be dogmatic. So, okay, I will call it there. But what I'd recommend you guys do is to put all this into play, you need to actually produce results and make progress. So what I recommend you do is not to get that part wrong. Watch my video on double progression, which I'll link up there, and I will see you over there. That will help. All right, guys. Oh, before I leave as well, I just wanted to say one thing. I say this every now and again because I think it's important to give gratitude to the audience. Just thank you. Just really a big, genuine thank you. The outpouring of support for what I'm trying to do, my mission here on YouTube, has been fantastic. And I do really appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. I don't always get time to reply to all the comments these days because there's a lot. I have opened up the YouTube membership for a very, very small amount of money per month, and that you will get an answer to your question. I do a monthly Q&A there. So if that's something you're interested in, I open that up as a very cheap, affordable option for that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is just thank you for being here and enjoying the journey that I'm going on, and there's more to come. All right, guys, take care.